Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Lenny Cosplay and Crafts. Today I'm going to show you how to make your very own surgical cap. I'm only showing you one of the many styles of these surgical caps that are available out there. So please take notes. And if you have any suggestions, please make sure that you comment below. To get started with this project, you want to make sure that you have some craft paper or newspaper, even if you use a regular plain white paper, whatever your preference is, to get ready to trace out a pattern. The best way to trace out a pattern for me in general, I just used some regular craft paper. I had a pencil or a marker and some craft scissors. For this particular style, it's literally only like 3 pieces that you need to sew together, technically 4. So you want to start off with your base, and it kind of looks like an upside down teardrop or a teardrop. And this is going to be used for the top of the head. Next, you're going to need a band. And the band pattern is basically cut straight across, and then you have your 2 ends on the top that are slightly snipped on an angle. And this is going to wrap around like that, if you can kind of envision the surgical cap. The other pieces I just used kind of like just excess fabric. You can use strings, you can use grosgrain ribbon, or you can use the same material that you were working with for the cap itself to create the tie-on straps in the back of the hat. And it looks like this. So going back to our patterns, we kind of need to focus on a measurement. So the measurement I played around with a lot, everyone. This is kind of like a one-size-fits-all pattern. You can customize this to any which way you'd like to suit your specific measured head, any way you'd like. But what I would like to just shout out to you guys is, if you were measuring it down from the point of the cap pattern itself, straight down the middle, you're looking at 11 inches long in length. And then kind of gradually growing out as it forms to the forehead, it gets wider. So I would say the widest part of this pattern would be 7.5 inches wide. So you're looking at 11 inches long, 7.5 inches wide on your widest part of the cap. Now you want to work on the band. The band, I measured out to be 25 inches in length. And it's 4.5 inches wide. And remember, only on one part of the band is where you're going to snip off both sides. Only on one side though. And I'll show you kind of how it's going to form together. So if we were putting this together, hypothetically speaking, I wanted to show you it in a rough drawing in case you need to make edits to your patterns. So you put your cap down. I'm kind of going to do this upside down, and the way this works is that your flap ends, when you sew, you're going to have it meet down towards the pointy tip of the cap, or the bottom tip of the teardrop pattern, if that makes sense to you. Alrighty. So let's say that you already measured out your fabric and you have the perfect pattern measurement. You picked out your fabric, you're gonna be tracing it over the fabric itself. So I went ahead and I did that. So you have a nice little upside down teardrop and you have your band. And you can have a lot of fun with these caps. You can mix and match the fabric. You can totally customize them to whatever you'd like. I also use some of the excess fabric of the cap itself to create the tie-ends on the back of the cap. And this is going to be fun. I know everything looks a little raw and unedgy. We have the frays coming out like crazy. Don't worry about that. We're going to clean that up and we're going to sew off the edges there. The ribbon ties are really easier to work with since they're not really frayed, or you can just gently put some heat to the edges there and it kind of reduces the fraying. If you were using excess fabric to create your ties for this cap, you can kind of turn it into bias tape like I am. And I'm using this little cool, unique product, my little bias tape helper maker. And yeah, you would, these come in different sizes too, depending on the thickness of the fabric that you're actually pushing through here. And what happens is, I'm using a number 12, so it's making it, it actually folds it and you pull it through, but you're going to put an iron to it and you iron down your bias tape nice and flat, and it makes it easier to sew and it doesn't unravel after you sew off the edges there, and it looks really, really nice. So without further ado, we are going to pin these together and then we're going to get sewing. All right, now we're going to get ready to start pinning together our fabrics. So this is where you have to be super careful with, and it might take you a couple of tries until you actually pin the right side, depending on what type of fabric you're working with. So what I like to always start out with is with the base of the cap itself, which is going to be the top part here. You want to work with the method I like to call pretty side outside, ugly side inside. So to help us start putting this together, we're going to put the pretty side face down onto the table. Next, we want to work with our bands, and we're going to make sure that the band has these slanted edges facing up, and you want them to point down to where the bottom of the teardrop is. That's where you want those ends to meet. And basically, I kind of work with about 2 inches from the bottom tip of this pattern. Give it about 2 inches, and this is where I actually start pinning. So I get that slanted part of the band. I work from the very top part of that edge. I do not pin this bottom part of the edge. And you begin pinning like so. Make sure those edges are really lined up nice and neat, and you want it to look like that. And you don't have to pin super duper close together. You don't want your machine to get these needles caught inside of it. So I like to work about maybe 1/4 of an inch away from the actual fabric itself, so that my machine can flow through the material very easily without getting damaged in any way. And to begin our first pin, it should look something like that. And then you would just continue all the way through to make sure that the fabric itself is all stretched around nice and evenly, and that one side doesn't have more slack than the other side. And yeah, that's how we start pinning our pattern together. Let's do this. All right, I think we're done. So once you've completed pinning your two pieces of fabric together, it should look something like this. So this is actually the inside of the cap itself. And be careful while handling this so you don't poke yourself with any pins. I'm going to gently fold this over just to show you what the outside of the cap would look like once it's completely sewn together. And it should look something a little bit like that. And then towards the back here, we would sew on these two pieces, the end ties. And there's going to be a little gap in between that. So if you had a ponytail or a bun, you can slip that through easily. Now let's put this inside out again. And we're going to work on making our very own, whoops, we're going to work on making our very own bias tape. All right, so for this next part, to make your own bias tape, you're going to need one of these handy dandy little bias tape makers. I just bought a kit off of Walmart and it gave me a couple different sizes of these, which is really helpful depending on what size of extra piece of fabric you're using. It also came with this little cool tool here that helps me push the fabric through the little bias tape maker itself. And you will need an iron. So once we started pushing this through, it kind of folds itself in half here. And you want to iron down on that and press down so it's nice and flat. And you just gently go across and do that so it doesn't unravel on you. Beautiful. You see that flattening out? It should look like that. Careful not to burn yourself. There you go. And then we just continue working it through. All right. Not too bad making our own bias tape. And it should come out like this. Definitely want to work with a little less steam than I did. Just a bad habit I have with working with steam. The bias tape itself, it didn't come out, the absolute greatest this time. I believe I could have made the fabric actually a little bit wider so it would fold nice and even together and just stay. Sometimes when you have an uneven cut of your fabric, what happens is that the fold, it doesn't fold in properly and they kind of spread apart a little bit as you saw here. But no worries, we can totally fix that as we're sewing the edges. So now that we have our bias tape made, let's put this cap together. All right, so you want to get your sewing machine in position. Make sure you have your bobbin and your top thread ready to go. And now we're going to begin our sewing process. So how I like to begin the sewing process is I start from one of the bottom ends here It kind of works as a really nice guide for me as I just let the thread flow through the material itself. Be careful when you are sewing that these side flaps here of the cap, they can kind of get caught up in your sewing. So I like to make sure that these are folded on the inside here. Really nice, packed and tucked away. Because believe it or not, you won't believe how many times I've sewn over the sides. And yeah, I had to completely take apart the cap and redo it. So don't let that happen to you, and learn from me. And yeah, this is good. So we're gonna load her up in the machine. We're gonna start from right about here and get your footer down, and we're ready to sew. All right, we've sewn together at the top part of the hat and the sides. Let's see how we did. Okay, this looks all right. I made sure that, you know, there was no openings or no gaps in between the seams here. And I made the band as even as I could so that they meet up nice and neat towards the bottom here, or the back of the cap, I should say. And it should look like that, guys. All right. So this is the easier step. Now, what I would like to do next, everyone, you know, completely does this differently, whatever works easiest for you. I like to start fixing up the back of the cap itself. So where I begin is actually creasing down about 1/4 of an inch, almost a 1/2 an inch, just so I have a nice straight line across the bottom here, and I have our little slant lined up nice and neat right about there. And I'm gonna sew over this about 2 to 3 times so that we have a nice, really good stitch just on the edge here so it doesn't fall apart and it looks really, really clean. And then I follow through and I'm going to fold inward our little teardrop bottom, or our little fishtail here, and I'm going to sew just across that about 2 or 3 times and continue working my way. Fold this down about another 1/2 an inch, sew over this about 2 or 3 times so that we have a nice, really clean edge on the back bottom part of the cap itself. And once we are done with that, we're going to follow through, clean up all the edges all across the side band of this cap. And at the very end, we're going to add our little tie backs. Let's get started. We're almost done. All right, so we have basically completed all of our edges for this cap. And I just want to give you guys a quick little show here. Look at the bottom, the back of the hat, and then we just completed the edges all across the band of this cap. Now you can really see the cap coming together. Really nice edge, looks super clean. Now we're going to be adding the tie ends to the back of the cap. They're going to be attached right towards the bottom pieces here so we can have this opening for a ponytail or a bun type hairstyle. Remember those bias tapes that we made out of the excess material that we used to make this cap? Well, now we're going to be sewing that together. So To the best of our ability, even if the creases or the foldovers came slightly apart, have no fear. We're going to work with this to the best of our ability, and we are going to work on folding it over again, and we're going to sew over this maybe once or twice so it doesn't unravel, and then we'll actually attach it to the back of our cap. And now that we have our bias tape edges sewn in completely, we are going to sew them into the inside of the cap. So I'm going to flip my cap over inside out, and you want it opened up like this. And next we're going to attach the bias tape inside out itself, and we're going to have it on the very corner of the cap itself, about 1 inch in, and we're going to sew over kind of like any stitch you would like to do. There's no wrong way of stitching that together as long as it is stitched in and it doesn't fall off the cap. I like to just go over it kind of like, you know, back and forth, kind of like a zigzag. Doesn't make the prettiest design on the outside of the cap. Sometimes you can do like an X, or you can make a square stitch all around, or do a nice circle, whatever your preference is. And yeah, you're going to do that to both sides of the cap, and then we sew off the very bottom edge of the bias tape, and then we're all done. We're so close to finishing. All right, we are officially done. We have did it. We've completed our surgical cap with the end ties attached to the bottom, and it's fully secure and ready to wear. So as I mentioned earlier in this video, this is only one of many different styles of surgical caps that you can make. The pattern that I created was based off of a couple different ideas that I did find across the internet, and I did self-teach myself how to do your very own surgical cap. I did adjust and tweak the measurements a little bit. However, this is kind of like a one-size-fits-all pattern that I measured out and showed you guys earlier in this video. You can totally customize it to yourselves, and you can use your very own measurements for the band, the base of the cap, and also the end ties as well. The end ties you can measure out to like any type of length. And the fabric materials, you can use a lot of different fabric materials to make the surgical cap, basically whatever you fancy. So I hope that you all enjoyed this tutorial as much as I did. I hope that you found this very helpful, and you know, feel free to tweak it amongst yourselves. If you do have any questions or comments, feel free to leave those comments below. I look forward to hearing all your positive feedback hopefully you guys got for me. I'd love to answer any questions that you may have. I would also love to learn how you guys make your own surgical caps, if you make different styles than I do. And yeah, so that's it. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Until next week, I will have another video for you with something cool to talk about. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, put on your notifications for my channel, Lenny Cosplay and Crafts. And until next week, stay crafty.